In the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, millions of Americans flocked to church yesterday. From packed pews in small towns to overflowing sanctuaries in cities, people sought comfort, unity, and prayer. The turnout reflected grief for a fallen conservative leader and a deeper hunger for stability and faith in a time of national crisis. In Massachusetts, CBS Boston covered a vigil inside a Plymouth church where young people who admired Kirk came together to mourn and pray. In Phoenix, Dream City Church, where Kirk worshipped himself, gathered in grief, with pastors speaking out about his legacy and calling for prayer for the entire nation. But not everybody and not everyone's experience was uplifting. One attendee wrote online, "Church was packed this morning. The pastor delivered a canned sermon that could have been written last year. My disappointment is immeasurable. My day is ruined." One of many similar posts regretting that their pastors didn't touch on the tragedy. Here's another soundbite from another fairly prominent conservative who says she also encountered the same thing. Listen.
Charlie was murdered for boldly using his voice to stand up for the truth, for the Bible, and for God. And silence from the pulpit is just not acceptable. The season of lukewarm Christianity is over. My church called it what it is, demonic and evil, and that's called leadership.
Joining us now is Michael Morisi. He's the author of the book, It Was Never About Justice, Exposing Corruption, Revealing Grace. He's also vice president of the Family Foundation and Church Ambassador Network, executive director of Campus Harvest, and pastor at Risen Life Ministries. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chanel. It's a pleasure to be on with you again.
Another thing that we saw in the reaction in the aftermath just on Sunday afternoon were the numbers of people who seemed to say they were picking up a Bible for the first time in their lives, or they were walking into church for the very first time. This feels kind of like a revival.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I think people are returning to church. I think hearts are being awakened. Pulpits are starting to thunder with truth, which is something that I think has been missing. You and I have talked about this before. I think the body of Christ is starting to rise with kind of a fresh courage. The Bible tells us the blood of the martyrs has always been the seed of revival. And I think Charlie's death is already shaking believers out of complacency.
What is your take on the disappointment, though, that I mentioned earlier from a lot of people? This isn't just one or two posts. This was hundreds, maybe thousands of people complaining about how their church just avoided the topic altogether.
I think sadly, and no condemnation intended here, but I think one of the reasons that we find our nation in the condition that it's in, with evil seeming to thrive, is because of the silence of the church. And I think what happens is a lot of pastors who were one time called to be shepherds of the church have now become the CEO of a business. And so their focus is on making everybody that comes in on Sunday feel comfortable so that they'll continue to come and tithe. And that's a sad thing. And I think it's some of that weakness from the pulpit that's caused us to lose the ability to speak boldly because we're taking our lead from our shepherds. And if they're afraid to touch on these subjects, then the church is going to be silent as well. My hope is that what's just happened.
Wasn't there a way if you were... no, I'm sorry, but I want to add something there. If you were a pastor in a church that was kind of concerned about, the political conversation, there's a way to talk about this without being political, but it would have been so odd not to talk about this because Charlie Kirk was a professed, open man of faith, someone who did not shy away from telling people about his love for Jesus Christ and his love for his faith in Christianity. It seems like you could go above politics there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The problem is we have now confused some of the issues that Charlie talked about all the time, the issues of the sanctity of unborn life and of the being two genders and of God's design for marriage and family and parental rights. These now have been painted over the past decade by media primarily and some political leaders as being political issues, when in reality they're not. These are biblical issues. If God talked about them, then they're biblical issues and they belong in the church. They should be being taught in the church.
On the flip side, Michael, there was noticeable silence in some churches that people objected to. There was addressing of this crisis that we have in the country, which solidified so many people in their Sunday services. But then on the other hand, you also had people like Jasmine Crockett's own pastor in Texas saying the following thing. Listen to this.
A white Christian gets killed, murdered, not assassinated. We're going to tell the whole truth today. Martin King got assassinated. Malcolm X got assassinated. Medgar X got assassinated. Don't compare Kirk to King.
Your response to that, don't compare Kirk to King.
It is really hard, Chanel, for me to hear something like that from someone who calls himself a pastor. The sad thing is that the number of people that are in his congregation, they're all going to feel that same level of hate and division and anger at the way we are talking about what happened to Charlie. And so I think that I'm trying to be as diplomatic as I can, but I don't. If I was sitting in front of him, I would tell him that it's probably time for him to step down. He doesn't belong in a pulpit. If he wants to be a motivational speaker or some type of a political motivator, then that's fine. But he doesn't belong in a pulpit to talk like that after something like this happened. Charlie Kirk, I believe, was killed because of his faith. It was his faith that he led with on the issues that created caused so many people to not like what he had to say.
What role do you believe churches play in healing the current divisions that you see, the divisions that were exposed by Kirk's murder?
I think it's critical that the church take the lead. I think it's time for the church to rise up, not in fear, but in faith, to pray for the leaders that we have, to encourage their congregations to go to the polls and elect people who are closely aligned with their biblical beliefs. We have to shine the light of Jesus. We have to speak truth. Sometimes truth is uncomfortable for us to hear. That's called conviction, and it comes from a Father who loves us and wants us to know when we're off track so that he can draw us closer to him. The biggest problem that we have right now is we have this two-party system in politics, and we have political leaders from one side who have for years spoken about Christians as if we are a threat to the nation. They have this rhetoric where faith is being mocked and people of faith are being vilified. This is where this climate of hate has taken root, and I think that they have some responsibility for the violence that we're seeing happen across the nation.
I think you're spot on, and I fear for what we're about to enter into if we don't have these open conversations, as Charlie Kirk would have wanted us to have. But that ultimately will come down to the people in which this problem is faced. They need to, the individuals in America need to recognize that. Michael Morisi, thank you very much for sharing that bit of wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chanel. Have a great night.
Coming up, employees who danced on Charlie Kirk's grave are facing a wave of comeuppance, and this is surprising quite a few of us. What's even more surprising is to see what fields they work in. Article 3 Project's Will Chamberlain joins us next.